Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review a movie called Death Sentence. This is a Kevin Bacon, John Goodman, Kelly Preston movie at the end of it all. I thought that this movie is one, really sad, and I didn't realize how sad it was, but also with this movie, I really, even though it was sad, I really enjoyed it. Like, it's one of those where it's kind of like a death wish or a guy that wants to go out of his way to put right with once went wrong kind of thing, and so he delivers his own kind of justice. Kind of like how in more recent movies we had the movie like Peppermint with Jennifer Garner. It's kind of along those same lines, but Jennifer Garner's character is much more military, whatever, trained, where Kevin Bacon's character just kind of goes and decides one day, oh, well, I guess I'll just start killing people today. That's basically what he ends up doing within this movie, but there's a justifying thing behind it as well. There's a justice behind it. And so, really, the thing that gets me most is the very beginning of this movie, because the very beginning of this movie is just fairly odd of the approach of just a lot of homemade scenes that are all to immediately have us invest in this family. I think that honestly is the best way to really open up a family film. And like, if you have like a group of friends, it doesn't work. I've seen that in the movie Truth or Dare, and it honestly just really doesn't help me or set up why I should care for that group of friends that are all just going on vacation from one another. It doesn't help me invest in those characters at all. Whereas this family home video thing really does help me invest in every single one of these characters, and immediately when I am eventually to be pulled away from every single one of them, that gets me. That hurts my feelings and whatever, and so on and so forth. That every one of these characters are to go the way they go in this movie. I I enjoy this film for how it really uh gets to you. It really does make you feel for these characters, and it really does make you overall enjoy the journey that Kevin Bacon's character goes into. And really, there are very few times where you really get sucked into a movie, because very few times you're just going like, oh, okay, well, here's this stereotypical thing that has to go down. This guy has to win at all odds, and everything is going bizarrely well for this person. All of a sudden, they know how to karate chop and kick butt, and all of a sudden, absurdly, we have it to where this person knows karate out of left field, and it makes no sense. It's This movie is so grounded and so like authentic and realistic that from start to finish you buy into this movie, because it doesn't all of a sudden have Kevin Bacon turning into Jackie Chan, or the Punisher, or the Terminator, and he is just like manhandling everybody. No, that doesn't happen this way. If anything, to me, it kind of feels like as powerful or as impactful as the Jennifer Lopez movie Enough, or even the quite possible other movies where you had it to where eventually someone is going to go away uh, and have numerous years of training and then come back, like Law Abiding Citizen or uh, Batman Begins. So, going into this movie, I thoroughly enjoy it, and I honestly think I've seen this more than once now, and every single time it feels like a refreshing movie. Like it feels like I haven't seen this. And if you watch it over and over and over again, like I still feel that you will get that kind of way of just like going into having it not be predictable to you, because when looking at it, you'll be just sucked into the movie, and that's all that's going to matter is you being invested in the story. Very few movies get you invested in the story unless you get invested in the character or there's some kind of magical hook, like movies like Berlin Syndrome, where you have it to where all of a sudden there's just a hook in that movie and you're like, oh my god, what is going on with this film? Things have really completely changed, and what the heck is going on now? So, I think it's about that time again to go into spoilers about this movie. If you'd like to know where to see Death Sentence, if you have HBO or HBO Max, you can dare in fact watch Death Sentence. If also if you don't have HBO or HBO Max, you can probably dare in fact watch Death Sentence via a Movie Pro or a. I've been using an app called Ultra Play HD Movies 2020. Really, if you just kind of go into movie apps, like I'm sure there's like a billion resources that you can go and find any number of things. Uh, if you want to see a movie, there's probably a movie app out there that you can probably see whatever you want. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to go into that. Otherwise, I need a little chocolate. Weird. Anyways, um, from I don't know how long ago. Anyways, so we're gonna go. I had chocolate on my hand bizarrely. I don't know from where. Like I just kind of. Anyways, uh, let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. I try to do things differently when it goes into that spoiler time. But anyways, so again, home videos to be displayed within the very beginning of this, showing time passing, New Year's, holidays, Christmases, so on and so forth, showing us little bits here and there of this family, showcasing that Brendan, which is Kevin Bacon and Kelly Preston's son. Kevin Bacon is named Nick Hum or Nick Hume. Nick, I want to say Nick Hum, and Kelly Preston is of course Helen Hum, and they have two sons. One an older son, which he is really into hockey. Brendan, I think, is much more of a bookworm guy. He's kind of like a. He's very smart, very intelligent, but you really don't get to know much about this kid because it's basically all about Brendan or all about Nick, or which is Kevin Bacon's character, and Kevin Bacon's journey through what he is going to have to force himself to go into for something as simple as vengeance. So we have it to where home videos invest us in this family. The only thing that I don't like about this movie is reasonably there is not enough time to marinate on a litany of most of these characters. Like, we have it to where John Goodman sticks out because he's freaking John Goodman. Like, John Goodman sticks out in every single thing that he's ever been in his life, just because he's just that good of an actor. And everybody else is just kind of, with the exclusion of course, Kevin Bacon, like, every single other character is just kind of just there to either be killed off or there to just like stick up screen time for us to really hate somebody, love somebody, or just like, well, this character isn't relevant, so let's just wait till this X amount of time is over and we'll never see this person again, kind of thing. That's the sad thing about this movie is there's some characters that like you have it to where the younger son Luke is honestly irrelevant in this movie, and so is honestly Kevin Bacon's wife Helen in this movie. She's just really not all that relevant, sadly enough. So going on in this movie, so we have the home videos showcasing who all these people are, and so we end up having Kevin Bacon and I think I'm just gonna change his name to Nick now, so that way you can get full-fledgedly on in this movie. So Nick and Brendan are driving home from a hockey game, and Brendan is telling his father, you know what? I really want to move up to Canada. Like, I really want to play hockey there. I want to go to college there, and so on and so forth. I just want to go to Canada. And Nick is just like, well, that's great and all, but like, really, do you really want to move all the way to Canada? Like you gotta find the right college, and you gotta find like, you just like just making the decision to just move up to Canada. That's a big step. And Brendan's like, well, yeah, but I don't care about any of that. I just want to play hockey. And so we end up having them going uh, going and seeing some car that does not have their beams on, and we end up having Nick saying, "Hey, like, where's your lights, buddy?" And so Nick flashes this other car, and immediately I'm like, dude, looking at every single urban legends, that thing always goes horribly awry, where you end up having a car flashing somebody their lights, and they end up like tracking them down and killing them somehow. So we end up having Nick and Brendan going to this gas station, and so Brendan ends up going into the gas station to go and get some Gatorade or something. And Nick is calling his wife Helen to let her know, hey, yeah, I'm going to be a little late. If anything, I had to go and drop our son off to the airport. He's going on to Canada, like, and yeah, like, if anything, he just had this decision in his mind, and like, he's just going off to Canada, honey. Like, like, yeah, I guess he'll just come for his things eventually, but he's just going off, and so And so like, you know how bad he is with goodbyes and everything. Like, basically telling his wife that his son has just made a spur of the moment decision and they'll just have to deal with it later, kind of thing. And so we end up having seemingly uh, a character called Joe Darley, who is uh, Joe Darley, Billy Darley, and a bunch of gang members all go and bum rush this gas station to rob the place, but then really, the real true deal of this gas station was for Joe Darley to kill this kid, Brendan, because this is a what is it called, a killing that is to make this guy a man, to prove to this gang that Joe can hang with this gang by killing someone. And like, it's like an entry fee to this game kind of thing, is to kill someone to earn your stripes, so to speak. And so we end up having Joe taking I believe, a machete and just stabbing Brendan, and he ends up going down and he's bleeding. So we have the gang running out, and Joe runs after them, and eventually Joe is to be left at this gas station, and the entire gang is all just driving off without him, to where Joe ends up going and getting hit by a car in the middle of the road, to where Joe ends up going to the, of course, hospital that eventually is to get arrested, and so on and so forth. Nick, who had tried to stop these assailants, uh, ends up retreating back to go and find his son and try to get anyone to help him or call any hospitals or whatever. And so we end up having it to where we find that, of course, Brandon had died. And so we have it to where Nick and his family end up going to the funeral and so on and so forth. And so we end up having it to where we find out that Nick is a person that deals with risk. He's one of those kind of like risk assessors. He's one of those kind of like numbers guys. And so we end up having, in the very beginning of this film, kind of showing what this guy does, to really show that he's just like a numbers crunching guy, and that he likes to see that all the same risks are all like the same every single year, so that way he can make every day seem like everything is still right with the world, that every way that someone is to die is still always the same. And so we end up having it to where Nick, after going and burying his son, he is to go to court to he is to point the finger at the guy who had killed his son, which was, of course, Joe Darley. And eventually, once they kind of go through the whole rigmarole of arresting Joe, putting him away, and then trial is to come, to where Nick is to basically have this guy being put away. We have it to where Nick is talking to his lawyer, and his lawyer is trying to get the very best deal. It's kind of like law-abiding citizen all over again. It's like We have it to where the lawyer doesn't want to put this guy away for the rest of his life. This lawyer is just like, well, I just want the quickest uh, way to get this to be in the win column. To where it's like, well, this guy will get this sentence, and it'll be this piddly sentence that makes no sense, and this guy will eventually just get out of prison, and we have it to where uh, Nick is just going like, wait a minute, I want this guy to be put away for the rest of his life. This guy murdered somebody. This guy murdered my son. I want this guy to be arrested and put away for the rest of his life. And the lawyer's like, well, that's great and all, but uh, really, if we go and try to further along this case, the longer we're going to have this Joe Darley actually have people feel sympathetic for this guy, and there's going to be some ways of which to kind of make this guy, who, even if he's the bad guy, still look good. And so I just want to kind of figure out how to put him away in the quickest way possible. And so we end up having Nick just going like, God, like, he killed my son, but the system is not gonna like give him really true justice. So I'm just gonna say, you know what? This guy over here, he did not do this crime. Nick goes up to the court and says, this guy, yeah, he did not do this crime. It was dark. I couldn't see anything. And so immediately we have it to where the court releases Joe Darby, or Joe Darley, and Nick goes and follows this guy, sees where exactly his home is, and so Nick follows this guy and then eventually goes home to go to his shed to find the sharpest tool that he can find. And while he's doing that, we end up having his son coming in and be like, hey, what are you doing, Dad? And so we end up having Lucas just kind of questioning things, but Kevin ends up just kind of like putting something in his back pocket, and so Helen ends up coming in and is like, well, hey, how are things going? Like, hey, how did the thing go? And Nick ends up saying like, well, I don't think it was the right guy. Like, I think I was wrong, and so like I think that they're gonna have to figure something out. And so Helen's like, well, what the heck? Like, I thought you were sure that this was the guy. And Nick is just like, well, I'm not sure. I wasn't sure. I'm sorry. So we end up having it to where this entire family is just mourning over the loss of Brendan, and so we end up having it to where eventually, like Helen is to cry in her bed, and Nick is to come in and comfort her, and eventually we have Lucas who goes into Brendan's room and starts crying about Brendan dying. And we end up having Nick kind of popping his head out to see Lucas doing this, and he ends up just going right back to bed. Like, we have it to where, like, I think, really when looking at it, it's like, Brendan was, like, kind of technically their golden child, and so really, for Nick, it's just like, well, hey, like hug the mother or whatever, and basically just say like, yeah, we lost our child. But when it comes down to Lucas, who is still alive, it's just like, meh, yeah, you're here, but meh, that sucks. That like you're not our golden child, and so you're just like, what are you going to do with your life, Lucas? What are you going to do with your life? And like, that's the sad thing, is we don't see what Lucas does after this whole scenario plays out. That's what really sucks about this movie. It's like, man, what if Lucas would have been a millionaire after this? I don't know. But anyways, so maybe he would change his name to George Lucas. I don't know. But anyways, so we go on here and have it to where uh, Nick eventually goes after Joe Darley, and it's in some dark alley, and so we end up having it to where Nick confronts Joe and ends up just stabbing this Joe guy, and they like fussle and tussle and whatever, but it ends up with Joe just getting stabbed in the chest, and then uh, Nick is to retrieve the weapon, throw it off to some bridge somewhere, like any other hitman or whatever would do. And eventually, Nick thinks that he can just hide in the shadows, and everything will be fine. That killing this one person will bring justice, and it won't. So we end up having Billy Darby, who is, of course, Joe Darley's brother. I keep saying Darby, but it's Darley. So we end up having Billy getting told by Bodie, what are these names? That, hey, like, just letting you know, Joe's dead, Billy. And so we have it to where the gang all decides to go on into the bar and just drink, and and so they and so they end up deciding to drink and just going like, well, hey man, like, it sucks that Joe's dead, but we're gonna just continue to drink. And then Billy confronts them all, and he's like, God, why are you all just like drinking like schlubs? Like, shouldn't you go out there and try to find his killer? And instead of just drinking, like drinking like stupid idiots. And so we end up having it to where the guys are just like, well, hey man, like, he's just a brother to me as you were to him. And it's like, no, no, like, if anything, like, he was a brother to you just because the money was good, right? Like, that's really the real thick of it. But anyways, so we have it to where eventually Billy is like, well, okay, we need to figure out who had killed Joe, and does anybody know anything? And so one of the guys had mentioned uh, that some girl had seen something, and so the girl had supposedly seen some guy in a suit and tie uh, be around there where around the time that Joe was getting killed. And so we have it to where luckily Billy had found some newspaper article of Nick and his photo, and so we have Billy that's like, well, hey, how about I bring it? How about we bring this photo to this girl and see if that's the guy that she saw? Sure, far enough, that is the guy that she saw, and so they end up all going out to go and track Nick down. So we end up having it to where uh, Nick is to, I would believe, leave his business one day, because we have Bodie, who ends up coming in to leave a message specifically for Nick at his office, and so uh, basically that message is a death threat. And so Nick ends up running out of his office, suitcase in hand, to just escape these gang members that he knows are coming after him. So he's running like the devil, kind of going into this parking lot, uh, this like a parking lot ramp where he's just like consistently going up the levels of the parking lot, trying to turn on every single car alarm so there'd just be a lot of witnesses there, trying to retrieve their cars and whatever. And so we end up having just Nick just bouncing on every car for every car alarm to turn on. And so we have it to where eventually the thugs are slowly but surely trying to chase after Nick because they can't tell exactly where he had gone at some point because he had went through all these like restaurants and all kinds of things. And so we end up having it to where eventually uh, Nick is to have one guy follow him all the way up to the top of this parking lot. And so we end up having it to where Nick turns on one of these car alarms, and one of the guys ends up going and finding out what that sound was, and so Nick ends up like jumping behind this guy and tries to one get the guy's gun out of his hand, and uh, two ends up rustling around with this guy to eventually go and have this guy being thrusted into this car to where eventually uh, Nick can go and roll this car off of the edge of this parking ramp to just have it just go all the way down to the very end or to the very bottom of the parking lot ramp to where it just crashes. And so we end up seeing Billy and all of his gang members just watching this car go flying down to the very bottom of this parking lot ramp and just being demolished and whatever. And so score another point, I guess, for Billy or Billy for Nick. And so we end up having uh, Nick going into his car and just skating away without being freaking touched. So we end up having it to where we are to have this kind of back and forth kind of thing to where reasonably uh, the detective of this thing is to get involved. So we end up having Detective Wallace, who is to have been involved in the shooting or the killing of Nick's son, uh, to where she is to go and have him. She's the detective there that is to have Kevin Bacon look and point out, like, yeah, he's the one. And so Detective Wallace ends up calling uh, this Joe Darley. He ends up calling him an animal, and so we have it to where Kevin Bacon ends up like repeating that sentiment. That's like, yeah, like you know what they called this guy, the guy that killed our son. They ended up calling him an animal, so on and so forth. So we have it to where Detective Wallace just walks up into uh, Nick's door because Nick is to call Detective Wallace and say that, like, hey, like, these guys are after me. Like, these guys are coming for me. Because we have it to where Billy ends up going and retrieving Nick's briefcase because Nick ends up just flinging his briefcase to jump over this fence, and Billy retrieves it, finds coincidentally Nick's wallet within this briefcase, and so we have it to where Billy knows exactly Nick's address. So we end up having it to where Detective Wallace says, like, well, hey, who started this? Did he start it? Did he start it, or did you start this? And so Nick is just like trying to just play it cool and whatever. And so we end up having it to where Detective Wallace just decides, well, I'm gonna have like officers parked outside your home. So will that just resolve everything for everybody? And so we also have it to at some point that Lucas ends up running away from home, and so Nick has to go and deal with Lucas running away from home and retrieving him. And we had Lucas who had gone to the gas station where Brendan had died. And we end up having to where Lucas is like, well, I'm sure you would have liked to have me die instead of Brendan, and so on and so forth. And so we end up having it to where Nick is just like, hey, stop all that talk and just come on home. And like kind of very forcefully, just kind of like, dude, I don't care about your feelings. Just come on home. I don't care. So so Lucas ends up coming on home to get hugged by his mother and I guess comforted, and Nick is just like, okay, problem resolved. I don't care. And so it's like, dude, I got my own problems to deal with. Like, there's a gun to my head eventually. So the cops are called. The cops are in front of his home, and so we end up having it to where while Nick and the family are all sleeping, we end up having a horn going off consistently because all the detectives that were in this detective's car were killed. So we end up having the gang just storming the castle to get into Nick's home to drag this entire family out of bed to go and shoot up both Lucas and Helen and to shoot uh, Kevin Bacon's character in the stomach. And eventually, I think he ends up getting uh, like something done with his head to where he has this like giant scar on his head to where he ends up just shaving his entire head off, just gives himself a good old fashioned buzz cut or whatever. So we end up having Kevin revived in hospital, and so we end up having it to where the detective goes and sees him yet again to uh, like kind of tell him, it's like, look what you've done. Like, this is just going to end in bloodshed. This is just going to end with every bit of your family all just dying at the hands of you. Like, you had made this mistake. This could have been all done, resolved, and over, but no. Like, you had to basically wake the sleeping dog kind of thing. And so we have it to where the detective tells Nick that his youngest son is still alive, or his only son now, I guess, is still alive, and so Nick stops whatever he's doing to go and see his son, and so we end up having it to where Nick tells the detective, it's like, well, hey, can I have a moment with my son? And so we have it to where Nick uh, tells Lucas, it's like, hey, man, like, I'm letting you know that, like, yeah, like, when Brandon came out and was our kid, it's like he was just like me, and like he was so easy and he was just so like I understood every little bit about him because he was just like me. When Lucas came out, Lucas was much more like his mother, and so I guess that's how Nick couldn't exactly relate to Lucas, I guess. But I guess bizarrely, Lucas could relate to his mother, and at some point in the movie, we end up having it to where uh, Lucas was helping his mother like take the VHSs and transfer them into, I guess, DVDs, and to have the home videos just being transferred over and so on and so forth. So I remember doing that. It was kind of like a thing to do, uh, to just kind of like, hey, we have like let's try to like record or whatever, like VHSs. I think a lot of people did that with a lot of stuff where they tried to just copy and paste like VHSs to like have a blank VHS, and just like so that way like you rent a movie from a VHS and then you try to like copy it so that we can watch it a million times if that's a movie you really liked, and so on and so forth. Everybody did it, but uh, they only did it from themselves. So if that's like a pirating or whatever thing, then like VHS aren't a thing anymore, and so on and so forth. Anyways, moving on. So we go on here, and we have Nick just basically telling his son, it's like, well, hey, like you're gonna be the only one left, pretty much. So yeah, so we have it to where Nick skates out of this window, and the detective is kind of going back into the room and notices that Nick had left through the window, but then also notices that it seems that Lucas is moving his finger, kind of telling him, like, hey, I'm coherent now. And so the detective shouts that, hey, doctor, like, look at this kid. And it looks like he's going to make a full recovery. And also, hey guys, it looks like Nick has sprung the hospital. So we have it to where Nick does one of two things. He ends up going to this bar to try to figure out where Billy and his friends are, and so the bar patron ends up telling him exactly where they are, and then eventually Billy also asks him, it's like, well, hey, like I need a boatload of guns, because we have we had Nick who goes home to uh, to say, okay, like this is what I'm going to do next. I'm going to shave my head with my own clippers and do a really bad, awful haircut job, but who cares? And then I'm gonna go off to uh, go and buy some guns. So we have it to where Billy Darley is to consistently talk to John Goodman's character, who is of course Bones Darley. So father and son. So we end up having it to where uh, Bones, of course, is basically the boss of Billy, like telling him everything to do besides him just being his dad. Because it's like, hey man, uh, I want what I want. You're gonna do what I want to do. So moving on. So we have it to where coincidentally, out of the million people that reasonably Nick could have went to get guns, he ends up going into the offices of Bones Darley and buying guns from him. And so we end up having Bones saying like, okay, well, it looks like you're a guy fixing to do a lot of killing. So like I'm just gonna put all these things out here, all of these guns, and you're gonna tell me which ones that you want. And so we end up having Kevin like picking out all these things and a dual barrel shotgun and all kinds of things, and he's like, I'm gonna buy all of these. And we have it to where Bones is like, man, you're doing a lot of killing. Like, who are you going to kill, and so on and so forth. And so Nick is like, nah, like come on, like here's like you want $3,000, I'm gonna give you $5,000. And so we have it to where like Bones is like John Goodman is giving him like manuals, all kinds of things, like bullets galore and what have you. He's like, it's like, hey man, like I don't want to tick you off, so like here's anything, like I'm gonna leave you here happy, kind of thing. And so we have it to where Nick just piles all these guns, uh, or Bones ends up piling all these guns into some sack and gives it to him, and Nick walks off. And Bones, before Nick leaves, he says like, "Hey, like I bet you're going after my son Billy, and you ended up killing my younger son, Joe, and." Like, you know what? Like, I'm like, he ends up saying, like, he's just kind of like, you know what? I'm fine with that because reasonably these kids are just screw ups. So, you know what? I'm fine with you going after these people. But if you ask me where exactly he is, I'm not going to tell you a lick of nothing. And I would just go ahead and just freaking shoot you right now if you're going to ask me that. But so we end up having it to where Nick is to go off and go after this gang, and we have it to where eventually that Bones ends up going and talking to Billy to let him know, hey, like this Nick guy is coming for you. And when Billy ends up finding out that information, he ends up just killing his own father, and then he ends up just kind of like realizing that he's probably going to be dead soon anyways. So, because we end up having Nick going to this guy named uh, Hecto, Heko, Hiko, and so he ends up having because there's this like tit for tat thing going here where uh, where Billy is to call and tell Nick that hey, like get ready for your death sentence. And so eventually, when Nick is to see this Hecto guy and basically put a shotgun through his door and a bullet bullet against this guy's head, uh, Nick ends up telling Hecto or Hecko or whatever to call Billy to say like, "Hey, I'm coming. I'm coming for you. Get ready for your sentence." And so we have it to where okay, Billy's getting prepared, and what good is that really gonna do? So we have it to where eventually Nick is to go through the onslaught of this building and start to pick people off one by one by one by one, and to eventually go and kill all the guys and whatever uh, that had wronged him and so on and so forth. And so we end up having it to eventually uh, that Billy and Nick are to empty out almost every single bullet that they have to try and get at one another. And so we end up having it to where Nick is kind of holding on to his neck because he's bleeding from his neck, and we end up having it to where Billy is pretty good and shot up. And so after all this killing has been going on, we end up having Billy and Nick sitting next to one another, and Billy looks at Nick and he's like, "Man, like I have really changed you to look like one of us." Like if that's not like the like we had it to our Nick, I guess to kill an animal, he had to become an animal. And so we have to where Billy is looking at Nick as like almost like a mirror, sadly enough, for Nick's part, and just like, man, like I drove you to be to be this guy, to be this person, and like what a way to go out if that's to go out like. to drive you that crazy and or insane or whatever to just look like one of us, so on and so forth. So we end up having it to where uh, Billy and Nick are to settle up with one another, and so Nick is to look at Billy and he's like, "Hey, are you ready?" Because Nick still has bullets in his gun, but Billy is out of bullets. So Nick goes and, of course, kills Billy, and then he ends up just making his way back to his home, and he ends up just kind of resting at his home and just decides to just bleed out. The detective ends up chasing after him to follow him back home to basically just tell him, "Hey, your son, he's gonna make a recovery, evidently." And yeah, and so we have it to where Nick could leave this world knowing that Lucas is going to make a recovery. It seems that Nick was like, who knows? It seemed like he was taking every single little bit of money that he had out of the bank. I hope that he probably transferred some of that money into maybe Lucas's account, but who knows? To just say, "Hey, guy, like you're probably if you survive, here's whatever money is left." Um, but yeah, so we end up having it to where, like, yeah, Nick just supposedly dies off at the end because he ends up going out the hero's way. Because that's, I'm assuming, why they're not going to ever have a sequel to the Ryan Gosling movie Drive, because I think they're just like, dude, he just dies off in the end. So, with that, that's how the movie ends, and I think I'm going to just get out of here. So, bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.